I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather, the Turrbal and the Jagera peoples. I recognise them as the first makers and producers to settle here along the edge of the Maiwar at Kurilpa Point, and as a result, they are, of course, the first creative and visual artists to occupy this place. I recognise them, and in the spirit of reconciliation, I recognise the enduring contribution of all First Australians to this, our shared creative community. Welcome everyone to this symposium, a day of exploring trans-regional connectivity, asking who speaks for a culture, and testing how cultural histories are formed and framed in settings like this. While the APT has evolved significantly over its now 25 years, the 9th Asia-Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art shares many of the ambitions and ideals that so keenly influenced the first, back in September 1993. And I do need to recognise and acknowledge the two very formative figures in that development are with us today in the audience. I do want to acknowledge Dr. Caroline Turner, who really was a pioneer of this project, and Alison Carroll, sitting nearby. Thank you. Who was a member, of course, of the first management committee for APT. And there are many others, Claire Roberts, Pat Hoffey, many others in the room that I think were part of that foundational story. Then, as now, there was no thematic rubric. However, like the first, APT9 was built on curatorial travel and research in the field, through experiences and conversations had in studios, homes and local restaurants, in global Asian cities and distant Pacific archipelagos. What determines the character of the APT is its remarkable network of personal and professional connections. Past and present APT artists, curators, writers and untold others hand us along to otherwise unknown agents of the next. That is what keeps this exhibition series so alive. In 1993, the Queensland Art Gallery became the first major art institution to commit itself to a triennial that would address the contemporary art of Australia, Asia and the Pacific, for then at least 3 successive iterations. Its artworks, installations and performances, the work of 76 artists selected by a national committee from 12 countries and Hong Kong, struck a chord locally which quickly reverberated around the region. In many of those countries, there was little in the way of a contemporary art ecology and many less biennale or triennial exhibitions, with Gwangju established in 95, Busan in 98 and Fukuoka in 99. For all their intrepidness, those early APTs needed to skillfully negotiate a range of cross-cultural issues then relatively untilled by Australia's major art institutions, let alone major art institutions elsewhere in the world. As the distinguished Thai art historian, Dr. Apanand Poshinanda noted trenchantly at the time, Asian contemporary art was not invented on the banks of the Brisbane River. I can assure you, as can Caroline and others, there was never a want of critical tension in those early conferences. I hope a bit of it resurfaces today. There were always bound to be issues around trust and integrity, familiarity and consistency, expertise and network building. Indeed, without that formative tension, APT would be nothing like what it is today. It soon became evident that an ostensibly open platform for art and ideas, which was axiomatic to that first triennial, could flourish despite the extraordinarily diverse range of cultural and community stakeholders. Pardon me. Among them was the need to balance the strictures of the academy in countries such as China, which had a well-established art pedagogy, with the demands of the next generation who simply wanted to slip from its grasp. That said, what distinguishes the APT's tenor and tone from the much less crowded field of biennial and triennial exhibitions then was its commitment to contemporary practice from our region, including through commissioning and collection building, the equivalence with which it valued and staged contemporary and customary work together, a new contemporaneity, its pioneering collaboration with artist-led projects to engage with children, and the later inclusion of cinema, and not least, its depth of regular field-based research built on an expanded network of national and regional in-country collaborators. The first APT had a cultural insistence and an unmistakable urgency. It was a courageous commingling of optimism and real-world pragmatism. It is impossible to forget the all but shamanistic performance of Indonesian artist Dadang Kristanto on the opening weekend, and the upwelling of poesy and generosity it unleashed from the Brisbane public, a largely unsuspecting Brisbane public. It should come as no surprise that Dadang's impact remains with us to this day, in a stilled homage given by Ziko El-Baikuni a generation later. Similar qualities attached to Araya Rajamradsuk's sombre performance for her late father, Roberto Villanuova's uncanny courtyard excavation, and Monty Boonma's monument to his Buddhist faith. Today, another Thai artist, Panapan Yodmani, ruptures the legacy of Boonma's spirit, and Hetien Lien from Myanmar lays Buddhism bare. It is this sheer diversity of overlapping, intersecting and challenging of worldviews and the new insights they bring that energise each APT in turn. It is what inexorably links the first through to the next. Works of art are freighted with meanings that accrue to them in their context of production. They carry elements of political, social and moral belief systems of individual artists, communities, countries and cultures. Think of Indigenous Australian artist Jonathan Jones's poetic response to the murmuration of birds on the wind, echoed in fleeting moments of Bangladeshi artist Munim Wasif's becalmed tone poem to Old Dhaka. In the context of Australia's social political orthodoxy, there is also the question of how to exhibit work that, were it to be shown at home, could be read as an incitement to political dissent or disobedience, and thus be grounds for censorship, the exile or imprisonment of the artist, or worse. That problem remains alive for the Asia-Pacific Triennial to this very day, and is one with which we continue to struggle. Moreover, in 1993, when the drawing together of Asia and the Pacific with Australia was groundbreaking and contentious enough on its own, the inclusion of the term contemporary was similarly loaded. 4 years earlier, in 1989, when Jean-Hubert Martin's Magicien de la Terre opened at the Pompidou in Paris, it created a fissure in the art world with its even-handed embrace of Western and non-Western work. It was a powerful curatorial rebuttal to a question begged by William Rubin's primitivism in 20th century art at MoMA in New York in 1984. Martin was arguing for a global art in which we might consider tribal practices from the Pacific and Africa as something more than the sources of inspiration for the modern avant-garde of the Euro-Americentric world. Today, the region looks very different to the one that APT9 essayed in 1993, as Paul Keating's Australia sought to project itself into the region, rather than overlooking it on the way through to Europe or the United States. The geopolitical plates have moved radically and multiple times since, most recently with the retreat of the United States from the region and China's rampant advance, leaving Australia on the horns of a dilemma. The countries of the Pacific, many of them small and vulnerable archipelagos of islands that have to deal first with rising sea levels, have found the geopolitical spotlight like never before. Foreign infrastructure investment loans and aid dollars have never been more tightly interwoven with economic, political, and now, it seems, military reach. Nationalism has risen triumphant over globalism, at least for the time being, which provides cover for a troubling increase in authoritarianism throughout the region. In this climate, how should the APT continue to host the work of artists who raise their voices against these forces, not the rising seas, but the non-elemental forces? The right response is to continue to provide an open and safe platform for art and artists to flourish simply by widening the audience for this discourse. This day is partly around that project. Today we'll hear from many voices, APT artists, curators our interlocutors group and experts who work both inside and outside cultural networks. Before you meet them, I would like to acknowledge once more the wider QAGOMA curatorial team who stand behind APT9. Curatorial Manager of Asian and Pacific Art, Dr. Zara Stanhope, led the effort through her Asia-Pacific team of Ruben Kean, Ruth McDougall, Tarun Nagesh, Abigail Bernal, Ruha Fafita and Emily Wakeling. They received great support from the international and Australian art teams through Geraldine Kitahi-Barlow, Ellie Buttrose, Bruce Johnson-McLean, Diane Moon and Katina Davidson, together with coordination from Natalie McCarthy. I would also like to thank our public engagement team for coordinating today's event. Tamsin Cullen, her team, Fiona Neal, Sophie Dixon and Michaelia Chin. To introduce some of APT9's ideas in more detail and to outline the rest of today's proceedings, it's my great pleasure to welcome the exhibition's lead curator and QAGOMA's Curatorial Manager of Asian and Pacific Art, Dr. Zara Stanhope. Would you please welcome Zara?
Thank you, Chris. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, custodial owners of the land on which we're meeting today and have been gathering, and their elders past, present and future. As Chris said, I'm Dr. Zara Stanhope, and through the Australian Centre of Asia-Pacific Art, the QAGOMA Curatorial and Public Programs team are really excited to welcome you here today. Artists, APT9 interlocutors, international visiting professionals through the Australia Council program, speakers and many guests. We're really excited to be able to welcome you to the symposium. I was lucky to be at Victoria University of Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand, during the tenure of Associate Professor Teresia Te Awia, much loved E Kiribati poet, scholar, mentor for her Pacific students. One of Teresia's lasting inspirations is that in the face of misrepresentation and misunderstanding that often comes from uninformed or flawed assumptions, especially in regard to peoples across Te Moana Nui, the Great Pacific Ocean, is that learning together, a type of lifelong navigation, is a way for peoples to thrive together amongst diversity. In preparing for this APT, my fellow curatorial team and I found that there were pressing concerns that arose from the exhibition but that we couldn't address within an exhibition format. Textures, questions, concerns that we thought really deserved to have greater consideration and discussion. And hence today, the space of a symposium offered us one way to do this, a place for reflection on qualities and conditions that were making themselves present. The first of these were the understanding and consideration of movements, relations, interactions and barriers across place, time and context. Do we hope understand how art and artists operate and act beyond existing boundaries? And to reflect on how relations and exchanges are influencing practice and art histories across this wide region of Asia, Australia and the Pacific. We also acknowledge that the many structures and conditions that constrain and challenge the participation of artists and arts professionals within contemporary art discourses are very much alive and present. Particularly the question of who is able to speak and who gets heard is ongoing in countries of past and present colonisation, those facing the force of the instrumentalisation of the art market and the domination of English as the lingua franca of the contemporary art world. Hence, another topic for discussion we thought would be a desire to understand the impacts of invisibility or silence for artists and artistic communities, and to ask how there can be opportunities to be equal participants and to take agency. And finally, a third topic that we thought was engaging is the ongoing awareness of being in the flow of the development and revisitation and revising of art histories by voices from within localities within the region. So this symposium is also an opportunity to drill further into those forces and dynamics at work in the construction of art history, art theory, art thinking in the region, the implications of the current history writing for contemporary art practice, and emergent frameworks for considering art and its narratives across the Asia-Pacific. Overall, these questions or concerns fell into the three topics that we've really framed around the priorities for sessions today. As some of the more pertinent considerations to arise from planning APT9, we hope these three sessions act as provocations for ourselves as well as to share amongst everybody else. What we hope today is a space of productive dialogue around transregionality, voice and histories in the present. My particular ambition for this event also was not to be directed towards finding answers, but rather to leave the day with more questions and perhaps a deeper immersion in perspectives on contemporary art and its ecologies across the region, hopefully with some provocations to go forward and particularly to think about where we go from APT9 towards APT10.